How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Okay. How you doing, Harvey?
Hi, Mike.
Hey guys, how you doing? I'm
Uh,
sorry. I'm late, and thanks for Mike for giving me a call.
No problem. No problem. Well, thanks for coming on on our little radio show. We're getting ready for the millions of our listeners, like Mike referenced. We are on Pacifica Radio Network, so we are heard in every time zone. And
Cool.
yeah, um, so today what we wanted to do, I'll just give you a quick outline. We wanted to get veterans perspective with regard to Memorial Day coming up. And then I was going to ask Mike to give the Veterans for Peace perspective on that nice write up they had, nice statement that they had on the website. And then, Matt, I'd come back to you and talk about that New York Times letter
Sure.
and, the impact and and you could plug the Eisenhower Media Group that you're in, that you're associate director of. So
Sure.
that's the way we plan to do this. Sounds good, and
Sounds good to me.
we'll let you out of here at least before dinner time.
All
So,
right.
all right. So I'm going to give a quick introduction, and we'll get going. So this is our last show before what the U.S. calls Memorial Day. So we're going to talk a little bit about Memorial Day and a lot about a lot of other stuff. We have the interim executive director of Veterans for Peace, Mike Ferner, and members of Veterans for Peace Advisory Board, Matt Hoh, who is also former U.S. Marine captain, State Department officer, and Eisenhower Media Network associate director, a veteran of the Iraq War, Afghanistan State Department officer, and senior fellow emeritus with the Center for International Policy. So thanks, gentlemen, for joining us. We do want to concentrate on other things like Veterans for Peace and the work of Eisenhower Media Network. But first, I would like to get your take, as Memorial Day is just about coming along, on Memorial Day, on how we celebrate it, and we even had Armed Services Day where coaches and players are wearing these
Hmm.
strange green ball caps. So, Mike, we'll start with you. Age before beauty, and give what's your perspective on what the United States calls Memorial Day?
Well, let's start with you call it Armed Services Day. I think it's also called Armed Forces Day. When I was in the Navy, we used to call it Armed Farces Day. And the Navy base that I was at Great Lakes, Illinois, uh, uh, had a demonstration around the base on Armed Forces Day, peace demonstration. And I just happened to be living in base housing right on the perimeter of the base. And I was working at the Navy hospital there as a corpsman, and I borrowed a sheet and painted a big peace sign on it and hung it on the fence. And the shore patrol didn't like that very much. But so I got busted, and I asked for a court martial instead of non-judicial punishment, administrative punishment. And Mike Royko, the Chicago reporter who had just written the book Boss about Richard Daley, got a hold of the fact that I was going up for a court martial for something like that, and he had a field day with it. And the Navy dropped the charges for lack of evidence, they said. So that was my experience with Armed Forces Day. But Memorial Day, it's another one of those days. And Jim, what you mentioned just about Armed Services Day, Armed Forces Day, it's like there's hardly a week go by where there isn't some military presence in our culture. The veterans come out on Pearl Harbor Day to talk to the school kids, and there's Memorial Day and Veterans Day, which Veterans for Peace calls Armistice Day, which what it was called originally. And it's just, on and on and on. And we got a really militarized culture, and Veterans for Peace is trying to say, hey, wait a minute, there's some real consequences when you have an economy that's based on war and you have a population that very, very few of whom have experienced anything about that. So, let's step back here a minute and see about what's going on. And that's something that Veterans for Peace can offer. And we do. Every year we try to put out the fact that this is not a day, it never was intended to be a day just for U.S. service people who have died in wars. It was supposed to be a day to remember all of the casualties of war. And I wanted to read you this is a little different than the statement that's on our website. I took liberty to jack it up a few notches, and it went out with our e-news recently. But here's the statement. It's very brief. It said, as we do every year on Memorial Day, Veterans for Peace remembers the victims of war. Our militarized culture remembers only U.S. war casualties and conveniently forgets the millions more dead and wounded who die in war, whom we shrug off as the enemy or obscenely dismiss as collateral damage. The women, children, the old and sick, the birds, the four-legged, the creatures of the sea, the trees and crops, the billions who go without clean water, education, and healthcare because war has stolen the money. No one wins in war, but even losing wars make money. This year and from henceforth, we remember and mourn all living things killed by war. We don't glorify either warriors or war. There is no glory in war. We educate the public about the folly and the costs of war. And ends with a quote from Jeanette Rankin that you can no more win a war than you can win an earthquake. So to the extent that we can, we try to get this message out there to say, this should not be some, kind of Rambo, John Wayne, military aircraft flyover day. We should be thinking about what happens during the war.
Excellent. Excellent. Matt, you're a post 9/11 vet, right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Well, tell us a little bit about your service and then what does Memorial Day mean to you?
Well, so I was in the Iraq War twice with the Marine Corps and also on a State Department team. And then I was in Afghanistan with the State Department as well. I went through, grew up during the 80s. I was born in 1973. So I was born the week after the U.S. pulled the last of its troops out of Vietnam. So I am really post-Vietnam era, one of the first born into that. And so I grew up through the 80s, grew up through the Reagan times, the rekindling of patriotism, if you will, particularly for political purposes in the United States. And of course, the great growth and expansion of the American military during that time. I mean, certainly in that fusion of the military, the political, the societal, the cultural, as well as the entertainment. And then, of course, that came to a head post 9/11, where it becomes religious. And I think there's always a degree of religion within American militarism. You can't divorce it from the, say, manifest destiny, right? American exceptionalism, all those things that built the American empire over centuries. However, I think post 9/11, you have this degree of ritual obligation that people have towards military members and veterans that is unthinking, that is just, it is a requirement. So people say to, the four of us, they will say, thank you for your service. As soon as they see your VFP t-shirt or still as soon as they know you're a veteran, they are going to say without thinking, just as the same as that you walk into, if you're Catholic, you walk into the church and you cross yourself before you enter the pew. It's a ritual. It's an obligation. You just do it without thinking. It's reflexive and it is a sacrilege, right? If you do not perform that right. So, I mean, I one time was on a train a number of years ago and I saw this kid from the Naval Academy. He was like, I don't know, however, he could have been more than a second year at the Naval Academy, a sophomore at the Naval Academy. This nice old lady came up to him and she said, you know what? I'm so sorry. I walked past you before and I didn't apologize. I didn't offer my thanks to your service. I want to apologize for that. You're right. I mean, like that type of just her guilt her realization that she had committed some type of sin of omission by not thanking. And so, I think with Memorial Day, when you look at the reasons for it, its genesis post-Civil War, the idea that in its most poignant terms, its most, I think its most beautiful qualities, there is an element to it that we should have in this country. But like so many other things, it's been captured by the militarism. It's utilized for its purposes, and the questioning that I think probably was included in the original Memorial Day purposes of what was this for, what was this sacrifice for, is certainly absent from any discussion today. And so you'll just have now a Memorial Day that it's not even, I know veterans will get upset because they will say Memorial Day, it's more than just hot dogs and hamburgers and going to the beach and the officials, the unofficial start of summer and all those things, barbecues and getting a day off from work. And, I think that would be fine, right? If it was just that, if the great sin in modern America about celebrating Memorial Day was not that it was devoid of any reference to veterans and to remembrance of war. The problem is that it's been exploited. So there is that element to it where there's a requirement that there is this very vapid, unthinking veneer painted over it of, yes, of course, we're remembering our veterans, make sure you thank them. But there's no element at all of questioning, no element of all of interrogation, nothing investigating what does this mean. And certainly understanding what's being memorialized in terms of the great loss, suffering, agony that lives with so many thousands of American families. And we're not even talking about what's occurred overseas, which, there should be a Memorial Day every day for what's occurred overseas. Right. But that, of course, is absent. The idea that you have the high rate of veteran suicides in my generation, the 250,000 veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan who have traumatic brain injury. I mean, that's something that's never discussed. Like that stress that's put on those individuals, their families, their communities. Those are all, I think, great, appropriate things from Memorial Day. But it seems to be lost in just this, this ritual type of religious observance of sanctification of the U.S. military and our need to thank it for our freedoms.
What struck me is, a lot of things struck me, but your connection to religion with regard to the military, because I'm going to a moral injury session at the VA in Nashville, and I also read a book, and Harvey and I interviewed a lady by the name of Dr. Kelly Denton Borhaug from Moravian University in Pennsylvania, who wrote that book and has been working with Chris Antel at the VA in Philadelphia on moral injury, and how she links our militarism with our Christian religion. And like you gave that wonderful example about the old lady, it's like you've got to do this, where our military, our militarism, our service members are, I think, and I'll try and get her word right, sacralized. They're elevated to this strange stature of Jesus, where he died on the cross, and we go and support United States all over the world, and some of those poor folks that don't come back are also sacrificed.
And the heresy that comes with any criticism of the military, any questioning is often quite pointed and sharp. So even to the point that you could have a comic, say like Pete Davidson on Saturday Night Live, who made fun of Dan Crenshaw. Dan Crenshaw is a former U.S. Navy SEAL. He is now a Republican Congress member in the U.S. House of Representatives from Texas, and he lost his eye during the war in Afghanistan. And Davidson, being a comedian, made fun of him because he had an eye patch, called him a pirate. And that brought on, this is several years ago, that brought on a hysteria within the political media structure we have in this country that Davidson had to make a formal apology on the next airing of Saturday Night Live. And they brought Crenshaw on. And a whole big to-do was done over this disservice that Davidson had done to this honorable war veteran that should never be questioned, and then let alone make fun of his eye patch. There is a degree of sacrilege that comes that will be utilized. It's weaponized, if you will. I know everyone likes to use that phrase now, weaponized, but it certainly is something that those that who are promoting militarism have been so effective to the point that the population really is cowed. I'll tell you this. I mean, I'll be out wearing my Veterans for Peace T-shirt or something, and I've had in most of the time when someone says thank you for your service, I will say, okay, you're welcome. I'm not going to get into a whole big to-do. Every once in a while, I'm not having my best day, and I'll say something snarky back. And I've had times when people have welcomed that. I remember very clearly one time being in a Trader Joe's, having my VFP shirt on. The young woman at the checkout counter said, "Thank you for your service." I said, "What are you thanking me for?" I took part in organized murder. And she said, "Oh my God, thank you for saying that. That's how I feel, but I'm always too scared to say anything like that."
Well, how about
so you have a population that's cowed into submission, right? Cowed into acceptance of something that they know that's wrong. So this idea of moral injury, how are we then repleting moral injury throughout our society by our society continuing to go along with structures, worshiping these structures, right, that they themselves know are corrupt?
Well, that they themselves know they are corrupt. Thankfully, you're giving the American public a lot more credit than I do. That's something I got to work on. So, well, Mike, back to you real quick. What are you going to do on Memorial Day Monday?
Well, I'm going to take a banner that VFP's crack graphic design person, Ellen Davidson, who's one of many great volunteers that we have. You know what? I can't share the screen here at this point, so I can't show you. But it's on the e-news that I just emailed you, Jim. And let me grab it so I can tell you properly what it says without messing it up, because it's a very nice banner. It says it's this white lettering on black, very stark. It says, "Veterans speak out for peace on Memorial Day." And in huge letters, it says, "Remember, all living things are victims of war. Veterans for Peace." And there's a couple other VFP members here in Toledo, and we're going to go to as many of the parades and functions that there are that we can get to, and just stand there and quietly hold that and hope get some people thinking and maybe get into some conversations. And I have I'll grab this thing here in just a second, but I have a card that I give to people when they say thank you for your service. And I can find the darn thing here. Okay. It's a photo of a soldier from either Iraq or Afghanistan, but in a current day uniform with some burning vehicles and stuff behind him. And it says, "Please don't thank me for my service unless you own an oil company or a bank. I was in the military, not the service. Thank the person who fixes your car, teaches your kids, nurses you back to health, or organizes a union. The military solution to conflict is death and destruction. That's not service." So it's.
How can we get cards like that? How can?
Yeah, I want one of those, a bunch of those. So copy them.
Yeah. Well, we'll put them out in the next e-news things that Veterans for Peace sends around. We'll put it on the website so you can download it and get them printed if you want.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
I like Matt's response too, because it's hard to put that response. That's the thing in our culture. All of the stuff that goes with the flow of whatever the popular culture is about is really snappy. You can put it on a bumper sticker. It doesn't require any thought. It identifies immediately with something that people know in a couple of words what you're saying. But if you want to try to get behind that or beneath that, it's a conversation, and it's hard to come up with the stuff that fits on a bumper sticker that answers support the troops. What in the world does that mean? Support the troops. Well, it's cover for let's send more of them to Iraq and Afghanistan and spend more money. Mm-hmm. We like to say support the troops, bring them home. That was one way of trying to be bumper stickerish about the language, but it's hard to come up with the really culturally zippy responses to things that are around us all the time. So I like what Matt had to say.
Yeah, that was great. It kind of reminded me. I used to teach sixth grade social studies in China Grove, North Carolina. You might be familiar, and it's just south of. It's between Salisbury and Charlotte. So
yeah. It's one of those things you see the sign for it, and it's just the name. But we have so many small towns.
Yeah.
And small, we got 100 counties here in North Carolina, but that brings me up a point I wanted to bring up as we talk about how widespread this militarism is. There's a great website out there called governmentcontracts1.com. And what you can do is you can go to it. And unfortunately, it hasn't been updated since 2020, but it shows where all these hundreds of billions of dollars of defense contracts go to. And you can put in your state, you can put in your county, you can put in your city. And just to show how pervasive the money is in this, because then, of course, that's how you can understand how pervasive the money is. You can understand how much the entertainment complex is behind it, the media and news are behind it, the politicians certainly are, what this Leviathan is, that what we're up against. But if you put in, say, things about North Carolina, is where I live. My county in North Carolina, in 20 years, from 2001 through 2020, we had 1,100 defense contractors just in this county.
What county is that?
Wake County, and we are the most populous county in the state. But in those 20 years, $5.2 billion in defense contracts just in this county for over 33,000 individual contracts. Right. My town, Wake Forest, we have 20,000 people here. I'm sorry, 50,000 people here in this town. And just in 2020 alone, we had 179 defense contracts issued in this town for $6.4 million. I mean, it's so pervasive. You can go to the smallest county in North Carolina, most rural county, most out of the way place you could find, Terrell County, which has got about 3,500 people, maybe. It's 600 square miles. So very rural, right? They had, over a 5-year period, 2 defense contractors who earned $120,000, getting in a county of 3,000 people, right? Mm-hmm. So that's how pervasive it is. And I urge people to go to that site, it's governmentcontracts1.com, and you can put in all your information, where you are, and it gives you an idea of how much. Because if we understand the defense budget to be almost $900 billion now, and if we know that half of that goes to the contractors, where is that $450 billion going? It's spread throughout the country, and that's purposefully done to make sure as much pressure is put on people to go along, to get along, right, as well as to quash any dissent. But I mean, this is all very nefarious and insidious how it works, and we are living through it. We're living through the fact that I checked the score for the Mets game the other day, and I noted that they had the green hats on and everything, because it's Armed Forces Day, right? I mean, so that type of militarism is just pushed. And of course, if you know anything about how this all started, it's not that Major League Baseball and National Football League or National Hockey League is doing this because they're just so patriotic and they really love the troops. They do it because the Pentagon pays them to do it.
Yeah. Our tax dollars at work.
Their recruitment budget.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Which again is another thing you can talk about, right? In the sense of how big is that? The Pentagon's PR budget is about $5 or $6 billion a year.
Mhm.
The biggest PR firm in the world, as of a couple of years ago, didn't even bring in $1 billion. So the Pentagon by itself is the world's largest PR agency by factor of 5 or 6. Just to give you an idea of what is going on here, what is involved, what kind of reach do they have, what kind of power do they have?
Exactly. Good Lord. That's troubling. So, but Matt, I wanted to also talk to you about this letter that came from the Eisenhower Media Network to Joe Biden, a full page in the New York Times. Talk to us about how that got started, who the signatories are, because it's quite a group, and what you hope to accomplish.
It's great. Let me just interrupt 1 second. I can tell you all that it's Matt might be too modest to say this, but it is creating a hell of a stir. People are noticing that all over the place.
Well, the reason why people are noticing it is because people are forwarding it. People are taking the time to print it out and bring it places, posting it up. Organizations like Peace in Ukraine Coalition and Code Pink and others are delivering it to Congress. So I think one of what we want to do with this full page ad, and it's a full page in the Times, and it was on page A5. So at the start of the paper, in an international section, and the idea was to break out of our bubble and to get into someone else's bubble effectively. By publishing an ad, we were able to put graphics in, we were able to put a timeline in. So we have a timeline that lists what led to the war, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Also, there's a map that speculates what would it look like if the American bases that ring Russia did the same. So what would it look like if you had Russian bases throughout Canada, throughout Mexico, throughout the Caribbean, et cetera? So putting those types of putting that kind of context into people's heads, because they don't get that from most of the media they consume. Just in general, media doesn't like to talk about history because it's complicated, it's boring, it belies the simple narrative of black and white that media likes so much. But then also, too, in this case, there is a tremendous bias among American mainstream media in its coverage of Russia's war in Ukraine, just as in Russia, there's a tremendous bias in their media as well. So, but the idea was to get it someplace that people who were not familiar with our argument, not familiar with what we are calling for, ceasefire and negotiations, why we are calling for it, and why there's a need for it. So we think it has been very successful. I will say also there will be another ad coming out this week in The Hill that has been put forward by Code Pink, Massachusetts Peace Action, Veterans for Peace, a whole list of organizations. And that will be published in The Hill this week with the same type of message and the same idea of getting this in front of people who wouldn't read it or see it otherwise because they're in their bubble, just as we are often in our bubble. And so that was the purpose of the ad, and I'm glad that it is being effective. I'm glad that it is getting, sent around to people, and I really appreciate everyone who's doing that and ask them to continue to do it.
Excellent.
That gets to the power that $6 billion PR budget that the Pentagon has. To come even close to being able to use the media in such a way that you can get a message across, you have to spend how many tens of thousands of dollars to take out a full page ad in the New York Times so that you can have those graphics that show that the shoe is on the other foot. We'd have missiles in Canada and Mexico. That's just one time that information breaks through the culture and the mass media. And, if the peace movement had, if this was a democracy and some of our money went to the things that people really want, we wouldn't have such an uphill battle. That's the hell of it.
Exactly. Well, one of the things when I was reading it, one of the things that struck me was this statement. we reject the idea that diplomats seeking peace must choose sides. In this case, either Russia or Ukraine. In favoring diplomacy, we choose the side of sanity, of humanity, of peace. That's a very, very powerful statement. But for those of us who just want to get it stopped, we're often called Putin puppets.
Right.
And even there's even so much disharmony within Veterans for Peace over this type of thing. There's a website, a Facebook page we have, and they weren't going for a while there. They weren't allowing anything published that didn't automatically condemn Putin without that automatically didn't condemn Putin. We'll just leave it right there.
Right. You have to put your caveats in. And it's something I believe. I mean, I believe that Russia's invasion is a war crime. It's a blatant violation of international law. If you are against preemptive war, you need to be against preemptive war in all cases. If you're against war, you generally need to be against war in all cases. I certainly have my feelings for the Ukrainian people, but also too, there's a degree, I think, as veterans where we can bring an objective aspect to this. And it's hard to be objective based on your own experiences. But when you have been through wars as futile as, say, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Iraq War, the Afghan War, you see the participation in wars like Syria and Libya, Somalia. We've had troops in Somalia for how many decades now? How many Somalis have we killed? How's that going? Right? With this idea where you can look at, particularly, say, a war like Ukraine, where you can see that it is just not possible for Ukraine to ever win militarily. Just not possible. They will never have the size enough army. They will just never have the armaments. The only way you're going to get the Russian army out of Ukraine is with a full NATO army involved. And the same for the Russians. The Russians will never have the ability to take all of Ukraine, defeat, subjugate Ukraine in a World War II style manner. So what is going on here? Why the continuation of this violence? If you know it is just stalemated and will remain stalemated, you are just putting young men and women and their families and their communities into the slaughter for the sake of what? Proving that you're right? Winning some type of morality tale? And I can tell you that the morality tale told here about the war is flipped and mirrored on the same as it is in Russia. So you have this, neither side thinks they're bad. Both sides think they have white hats on. So at what point, realizing the futility of this, do you stop the killing, stop the slaughter, stop the destruction, and come to peace? And at some point, hopefully sooner, that sense will set in. There's also the very real danger here of escalation, where the alternative to the stalemate that we see, if military victory is not possible, is an escalation, a very dangerous escalation into a nuclear third war, something that we've lived in fear and terror of for 80 years. And somehow, by the grace of God, we have not put ourselves through, because we certainly have at times seemingly attempted to do that. So that type of danger is also another reason why there needs to be a peace path. There needs to be negotiations. There needs to be ceasefire. There needs to be de-escalation and demilitarization. And this idea that this is what diplomats are supposed to do. And this is our allegation, basically, about the United States over these last decades since the end of the Cold War, is that there has been deliberate diplomatic malpractice. Where the point came to in February 24 was a point, or February 2022 was a point that was reached through deliberate choices, one after another, meant by the United States to increase tensions, to bring about confrontation, to put Russia into a difficult place. And whether or not the American administrations ever thought Russia would go through with an invasion, I don't know why they would not, because whenever Russia before has said we have a red line and that red line is crossed, they do something about it, whether it be Georgia, whether it be Syria, whether it be Crimea. Mm-hmm. So this diplomatic malpractice is what brought us to this point. And so we call now, of course, as we say, if, the absence of diplomacy brought this war about, the presence of the diplomacy can end it.
Excellent. The presence of diplomacy. I wonder where that would come from. Winking, blinking, or no? I don't know. I don't know whether we've got the capability within the administration for that type of diplomacy. And the reason I say that, and I'll we had KJ No on the show a couple of weeks ago saying that we basically are already, well, let's put it this way, in the first stages of a war with China. How would either and both of you respond to that?
Well, we've been pretty good at proxy wars, and what we're seeing in Ukraine is a proxy war. Our administration, there's the hubris is at such a level that they come right out and say this is a war to weaken Russia. That we're going to supply the arms and Ukraine will supply the blood. I mean, it's incredible how bold they are about it, and they're ginning up China for Taiwan to be the next proxy. And we've got the map that was in the New York Times ad that we've been talking about shows if Canada and Mexico were lined with military bases from Russia, and we're doing the same thing with China. I mean, and Australia's following along. It's just these countries that have got so tied in with the U.S. empire and go along with, oh sure, you want to put some nuclear submarines in our country? Yeah, okay, we'll do that. And and it's just one provocation after another. And the people in our government know that. I mean, this is not just kind of happening and whoops, we didn't realize we were doing such stupid things here diplomatically. So.
Matt?
Right. That's where this horror show gets even worse, if it's possible, is that if you look at the resistance against the war in Ukraine from political sections in Washington, D.C., primarily coming from Republicans, almost all coming from Republicans, at least among elected officials, it is, you could boil it down to, we don't believe we should be spending this money killing Russians. We should use that money to kill Chinese. And that may be a path for this war to find an end. The war in Ukraine is that the United States feels it is too bogged down Ukraine. We're using too many of our missiles and rockets against the Russians when we need to be saving them up for the Chinese. The other aspect that is coming too, that again makes this horror show even worse, is the calculation within the White House as to what to do about 2024. And whether or not the White House wants to go into the campaign with this Ukraine-Russia war still be going on, still being stalemated, no victory on either side. President Zelensky showing up every now and again asking for more weapons and berating us for not doing enough. Does the White House want that going into the campaign? Because whatever the White House decides to do, the Republican, whether it be Trump, DeSantis, or whoever, is going to say the opposite. So if the White House tries to wind the war down, Trump or DeSantis or whoever will say, I would have kept fighting. And the opposite, of course, if it was the case. So I think you have seen, fortunately, in the last couple of weeks, a willingness in the major newspapers. Politico just had a big article about it last week, as well as in the last couple of weeks, the Journal, the Times, the Post have had articles about negotiations. Which a few months ago, negotiations was a forbidden word. You couldn't utter that word in Washington, D.C. And now it is being broached. It's being floated out there. You're starting to see this media messaging, the massaging of it come about, where there's almost like a preparation for a shift in U.S. policy to maybe embrace negotiations or seek them. Whether or not the Russians at this point will go along, I don't know. I think that chance has been lost. The Russians were rebuffed in their attempts at negotiations before their invasion, and in the early months of their invasion, certainly negotiations were occurring, as we know, that the United States and NATO pulled the Ukrainians out of. So the Russians at this point may well say, you know what, we tried. Now we're just going to win militarily. In my estimation, the Russians have territorially, at least, what they want. They seem to have achieved their objectives. Their stated objectives, so they may not feel the need to negotiate. And as this Politico article said this week, it may just turn into a stalemated, frozen conflict like the DMZ in Korea, which, if that's what it is, so be it. People aren't being slaughtered. People aren't being ruined. The environment's not being destroyed. we live with a sword of Damocles over our heads, but at least we're alive. So,
What do you think about Biden coming out just recently? I just read this article this morning, in the I think in the Guardian, where Biden has authorized training for Ukrainian pilots for
F-16s.
Yeah.
F-16s.
yeah, that actually fits into this idea of a negotiated settlement, because those F6, according to Colin Cowell, who is one of the senior people at the Defense Department, when he briefed the Congress on this type of thing a couple of months ago, his estimation would take a couple of years to get them F-16s, which is what we're seeing for a lot of these weapons programs. He also said it would cost about $11 billion. So that's $11 billion more into the defense industry. So there's a lot of people, as Mike says, and I've learned it from Mike, and I say it all the time, even losing wars make money. So I think what you're seeing now, you just had another big tranche of hundreds of millions of dollars of weapons being provided to Ukraine. Most of those are through long-term contracts. The United States and Europe, NATO, are running out of its stocks. So what I think the thought now is continue to provide these weapons to Ukraine over the long term, get to a negotiated settlement, get to some type of ceasefire, some type of frozen conflict, a la Korea. And then we can get them their F-16s. We can get them all these other things. But there certainly is no wonder weapon that's going to win the war for either side. The Russians do the same thing, too. The Russians will, from time to time, introduce a weapon they hadn't used before, when they bring in maybe one of their newer aircraft, or they bring in a new type of, the big deal was made a couple of months ago when they brought in their thermobaric weapon systems, these big fire bombs, basically. It's not going to change the war. It's going to prolong the war. It's going to kill more people. It's going to escalate it because there'll be a response, of course. But yeah, I mean, the notion that there are a lot of people benefiting from this war, and that this is a war that was long wanted by people in D.C. and Brussels and London and Kyiv and Moscow, is certainly apparent, right?
Oh, good Lord. Good Lord. Harvey, do you have a question? You want to throw something out?
Well, I wish I felt as confident about the escalation. It feels to me like it's accelerating. And much of what I read in the Times and the Guardian is almost giddy about the prospects of retaking Crimea and blah, blah, blah. And we just, the drone assault on the Kremlin was just blown off by these major media. So I feel like the escalation engine is revving up, and the more it does, the greater the risk of it getting out of control. So that's that. As far as Memorial Day, I think Veterans for Peace has done a great job over the years with that, especially with their Letters to the Wall campaign that they had for years. Some of the most moving segments around that we've had on our show, people reading their letters. And I think that's powerful because it personalizes it. And I think that would be good to think about continuing. And I'm here in Charleston. I'm planning to go down to Beaufort, which is about an hour and a half from here. They're having every year they have a Memorial Day parade. Of course, that's where Parris Island is. So a lot of Marines, and they also have a National Veteran Cemetery there, and they have a Memorial Day observance there where people do put flowers on the graves, and there's keynote speakers. And also I'm planning to go down to that, and hopefully my daughter is going to be visiting, will come with me, and I got 3 grandsons who will have the day off, so I'll try to bring as many as I can with me and bring all the Veterans for Peace gear that I can scrape together. We don't have a chapter here, but anyway, that's my plan, and I think it'll be interesting to see how it's responded to. the other thing that I think about on Memorial Day is it's become almost a trope, and I haven't seen as much of it during Trump or Biden, but maybe it doesn't get as much press. But it's the obligatory laying of the wreath at Arlington National Cemetery on Memorial Day. And I know it used to just get under my skin when Obama was president, because every year he would say the same thing. And probably those before and after have been saying it. But it's this whole notion of we owe them a debt we can never repay. And all I can think when I hear that is, well, maybe we ought to try, because that's like, okay, we don't have to do anything because we can never repay. Well, you can't bring their lives back, but the survivors might appreciate it if people actually said, we need to think of another way of solving our problems beside war. Maybe the families of the dead, or if the dead could speak, maybe that's something that would go some way toward repaying the debt.
And this is nothing new. What we're talking about, the sanctifying
Yeah.
the military.
Yeah.
The Greeks did the same thing. Every empire, every culture that is really into the military, into expanding their power. They have to come up with ways of idolizing and sanctifying, and that's what the little bits of colored cloth are that military people get. All kinds of things that are just taken into the popular culture and automatically assimilated, and it's not by accident. They've been doing this forever.
Yeah, the shiny medals and ribbons.
Yeah.
Oh, in the military-industrial complex, we know the Romans had theirs. And we know that they some of their campaigns and the keeping some of the provinces they shouldn't have kept over the decades and centuries had to do with military contracts, the amount of money that was being brought in, how much money it brought people in Rome who benefited off of those wars. And I have to imagine they had like their F-35 type things, a brand new sword that was going to win every war, but it couldn't fit into the scabbard or something like that, right? So it's probably the same type of catastrophe, right? Same type of crime racket. But it's true. This is timeless, which means, I guess, that which I think means for us is that we shouldn't despair. That if this is the way that has been through recorded human history, then this is one of the things that we must carry on and bear as a burden, if you will, right? Because this is the nature of of our race, of our species, of our civilization. And unfortunate as it may be, it gives us a calling then.
Yeah. Well, also Rome fell. So I'm not advocating that the United States, we could bring all our troops home and close all our bases, and that might make us safer. But how do we turn this around? How do we turn this militarism, this religiosity within the military? How do we turn it around?
Well, that's a topic for a whole nother show, Jim. And I mentioned if we had a democracy. And the peace movement, I've been observing this for decades. We come out against the latest weapon system, the latest invasion. We oppose the latest invasion. Whatever it is, we have subsets of the peace movement that oppose drones. And, at some point we have to realize that, those things, various weapon systems and invasions need to be opposed. We need to do what we can. But we've got to learn how to chew gum and walk at the same time. And if we don't start figuring out a way to take the political power that is going to prevent the arms industry from writing our foreign policy and the insurance companies from writing our health policy, we're going to always be on the defensive. We're going to always be reacting. And there's a democracy movement that has been talking about this for a while. And I hope that we can get that conversation going more actively in Veterans for Peace, so that we're not just constantly, the darlings of the anti-war movement for whatever the latest invasion is.
Matt?
I agree. It comes to the politics of our country, our systems, how money is so corruptive, and because it's just not. We don't have just this problem within the militarization, where we have this problem throughout all industries in the United States. We could have the same conversation about agriculture, right? And about how the money of big ag influences everything to do with agriculture in our country. And we have all types of health issues and all types of that stem from that. I mean, we have our health in this country is horrible compared to other nations. And so amount of people that die every year because of the power of big ag, say, right? And that comes back to the same, I think, foundational issues that we have with the militarism in terms of the money that's able to get into our political system. And I think we have to do finding, of course, and refining, I should say, refining what we do, recognizing our victories, capitalizing on them, but then also too recognizing that what we're up against is itself a living organism that itself will react. An example I give is 10 years ago, great anti-war effort in terms of keeping the Obama administration from getting involved in the Syrian war. Yeah. And really successful effort. Hats off to it really was great. But then within a year, the United States was in Syria. And that was because of the horror of the Islamic State and the way that message, that media of what the Islamic State was doing was so powerful that how are you going to stand up and say, don't get involved in that? We did, but you just get overrun. You also see, too, the way that the media has changed, the way the communications around this have changed. But we also see the same things happening to our brothers and sisters in nations like Japan and Australia and in Germany, which are becoming increasingly militarized over the last decades. Certainly the Australians, the Germans, the Japanese, in terms of their defense policies, are unrecognizable from 10 years ago. Certainly Australia, maybe longer than that, but certainly the Germans and the Japanese in the last 10 years have become so militarized, with the Japanese looking to increase their defense budget by hundreds of billions of dollars, become the third biggest defense spender in the world is their plan. The French are looking to increase their defense budget by 30 to 40% a year. I mean, so you have, and so what do we do? How do we connect? How do we work with others across boundaries, across countries, to form some type of opposition that's effective? That's a real question, but I think those opportunities are out there, though.
All those expenditures for military, for defense, when the climate and the globe is burning, it just it's nuts.
It is, and in cases, say France, where they are, going to be putting hundreds of billions of more of euros into their defense budget while they're increasing their pension age, right? As we've been following and seeing, and millions taking the streets. The gall of that. Yeah. But one of the things that gives me hope, though, is these conversations. 10 years ago, we didn't have this. Zoom was out and you had Skype and, but we weren't able to do this, to have a show like this that could be done so easily and so well with just the software that's on your phone or on your computer. And, so you see the reaction to the major media in the U.S., that how it has become, just has become much more reactionary itself in terms of how it operates. And I think that's because it's losing not just its market share, but it's losing its identity and its purpose. And this is what gives me hope, is this ability to communicate like this. What will media transform into? The ability to reach people. And we have to be recognizing, though, of course, that money is going to influence things, and that we're going to have to be adapting and evolving as we go in order to circumvent whatever roadblocks. I think people will recall several years ago, say you watched a libertarian or a progressive podcast show or whatever on YouTube, your next recommendations on YouTube would be similar. similar alternative, independent, political type of commentary. But after a while, Fox and MSNBC and CNN figured it all out. And so, maybe you watch a libertarian podcast or you watch a progressive podcast, and the next thing you know, you're being recommended Sean Hannity or being recommended Rachel Maddow. So we have to be aware that the organizations, the establishment, the powers that be, whoever, are living themselves, and that they will adapt. And when they see something successful, say like on YouTube, where you could have, holy cow, these people are getting hundreds of thousands of views, while the organizations the established media is going to do something about that, as they have. So that's something we have to keep in mind.
Matt, I'm looking at this video here, and I notice a lot of gray hair on me and Harvey and Mike, and very little on you. And so what, you ought to run for office.
No, thank you. I just turned 50. There's a filter. There's a filter on Zoom where it takes all the gray out and everything. Yeah. The Just for Men filter. Keith Hernandez hypes it. Yeah. But no, thank you. I ran for office last year. I think nonpartisan means are the ways for me, best for me. But certainly, no, I do encourage other people to run. I do think we need people running in all forms, all varieties, at all levels, representing the principles, the principles that they hold, and representing their families and their communities. And whether it's best for them to do that through the established parties or through third parties or as independent is something for them to decide. I certainly believe we do have a duopoly in this country that is harmful and dangerous, and it should be destroyed. And I think we should have instant runoff voting and ranked choice voting and proportional representation, and the electoral college needs to be abolished, those types of things. But at the same time, too, if people have a desire to improve their communities, whether it be at the local, state, federal level, whatever is the best avenue for them to approach it is what I recommend they do. But certainly if they have that feeling in their gut, and I'm always happy to talk to people about it.
Excellent. So, Mike and Matt, we've kept you for almost an hour, and so it's time to let you go. But any last words? Mike, any last words?
Well, I am maybe a unrepentant optimist, but I do think that the majority of people in this country, even though it doesn't get expressed very well or very often, the majority of people are decent and want the same basic things that we know we need to do, whether it's healthcare or agricultural policies or whatever it is. And there is a deep well of concern for those sorts of things. And if the program that you are doing here and the efforts of Veterans for Peace and people like Matt to continue speaking out do get through, they do. And it's not a monolithic wall out there. There's cracks in it, and the light gets through the cracks all the time.
Excellent. And people can follow you and whatever people are doing on Veterans for Peace by going to veteransforpeace.org.
Yep.
All right. Matt, some last words, and how can people follow what you're doing?
Yeah, I would say first, there's a lot of organizations out there doing great work. Veterans for Peace, of course, is one of them. And you don't need to be a veteran to be a member of Veterans for Peace. You could be an associate member. Our associate members, in many ways, such as the great Ellen Davidson was brought up. I mean, the lifeblood, of the organization in many ways. So certainly being involved as you can. Whether it be locally, whether it be regionally, or whether it be kind of nationally, internationally, but organizations like Code Pink, Peace Action, there's other things as well, War Industry Resisters Network, things like that. And people can follow me on Twitter at Matthew P. Hoh, P as in Patrick, last name spelled Hoh. And yeah, I'm the associate director for the Eisenhower Media Network. So if you just Google Eisenhower Media Network, you'll find us and you can follow us there as well.
So
There you go.
all right. Well, thanks so much, gentlemen. This has been a joy. This has been so informative, and we really appreciate you taking the time for us.
Thank you for doing what you're doing.
And what we'll do is I'll put this on SoundCloud. I'll send the link to Mike, share it with Matt, and Matt, or I can just share it with your email. And it'll also be on Spotify. Once you get it, share it out, and and thanks so much. We really appreciate it.
And I second that emotion.
Yeah, thanks, guys. And sorry I was late.
Oh, no problem. No problem. All right. Take care.
Thanks
All
for
right. Bye-bye.
Bye now.